Why vote? Why vote?
I said we vote because of the blood oath that's been spilled for our past leaders and ancestors who have all been killed, to fight for a right that we as humans deserve. That's a reason why I vote, but it's only the first. Why vote? You should vote if you care about your community. I mean, look at your everyday life and tell me, what do you see?
Please have mercy on me.
Why vote? Is it a perfect place full of peace, love, and positivity? Or are there some problems that can be solved and room for more productivity? Most people hear the word vote and think of a U.S. president, when in reality that position for us is irrelevant. Do you know about state representatives, governors, mayors, or city council members, attorney generals, sheriffs, judges, and local commissioners? See, there are many positions of power we all have a power to impact. But the true reason why we are enslaved is within us, and that's a fact.
Wake up, wake up. Yeah. It's that time. It's that time, y'all. Good morning, freedom fighters. It's your boy, Rashad Turner. You're tuning in live on the dark side of education. We live today, Citizen Ed, Justice for the Cities. Appreciate y'all. How y'all doing? What's up? What's up? Again, thank you for tuning in. Got a good one for you today. Good morning, Christina. You always tuning in. Appreciate you, family. Jasmine, good morning. Your first time on. Glad you're here. Hope I can speak that truth to power and make it worth it. Appreciate you. Chaz, good morning. Good morning, everybody. Glad to be here. Glad y'all's here with me. Like I said, we got some stuff to talk about today. Again, it's the dark side of education. I'm your host, Rashad Turner. It's always good to wake up on a Sunday morning. Wake up every day, right? We're blessed to wake up, but have you heard about what's going on in Minnesota with our education system, how it's looking for our children? Hopefully everybody's staying safe, keeping the children safe. But have you heard 2 in 5 classes, our high school students in St. Paul, SPPS, St. Paul high schoolers, failing 40% of their classes. Wow, right? Surprising? Hell no. Not surprising at all, right? 40% of St. Paul high schoolers, high schoolers, all of them, St. Paul high schoolers, failing 40% of their classes. Why do I say it's not a surprise? Because if we go back and look at what was happening with St. Paul public schools before COVID, and I'm not just talking about our worst in nation education gaps, but if we think about what was happening in St. Paul public schools, what was going on before COVID, y'all? That's right. Teachers union. Oh, yeah. And I know some of y'all have a hard time coming to Jesus on the teachers union, right? But I'm hoping you have that come to Jesus moment soon, y'all. Right? When you think about, and this trips me out, right? This really trips me out. You know, some of the same people who call themselves progressives, they say they're woke, allies, you know, those folks. Let me get some coffee. Hold on. You got your coffee, tea, water, something. It might get a little ugly today, y'all. But those folks that say they're woke, they call themselves progressives, are allies. The same people I always talk about that will rally against police brutality and police unions. Yes, rally against police brutality and police unions. But for some reason, these folks have a hard time acknowledging, right? They refuse to acknowledge that teachers unions ain't no different than police unions. I think about that. They show up out there, signs, all of that stuff. You might drive by their house, there's yard signs and all of that. But when it comes to the teachers union, these folks just refuse to believe it. Now, there's some folks out there that get it. You make the connection between police unions and teachers unions. But these folks I'm talking about right here, they just don't get it. They don't want to get it, right? Teachers unions always have something to do with why our children aren't receiving the instruction, why they're not receiving the support that they need, that our children need to become all that they are capable of blossoming into. Teachers unions always finding a way to shrink our children's brains. And for some reason, and I don't know if it's Minnesota nice, it might be. For those of y'all tuning in not from Minnesota, maybe you've heard of Minnesota nice, maybe you haven't. But I don't know what it is that has these folks turn a blind eye to what the teachers unions are all about. But let me get back to, well, yes, teachers unions. St. Paul Federation of Educators, led by Nick Faber, another one of those teachers unions leaders who, I'll say is grand and a wizard at keeping our children as far away from quality education as possible. Nick Faber. But before COVID hit, the St. Paul Federation of Educators went on strike. Right? They turned their backs on our children. Nick Faber tricked their members into going on strike in the name of justice, under the guise of making sure students of color, children of color, have what they need to be successful. Sound familiar? Teachers union go on strike where you're at, in your city? It's always that same narrative. It's for the children. But as it always turns out, especially here in Minnesota, you can hear that from the teachers unions. Oh, it's for the children. But we also have worst in nation education gaps. So if it's for the children, why do our gaps continue to grow, continue to widen? Why are there more and more of our children in our neighborhoods who can't read if it's for the children? Right? So that's why I say tricked their members into going on strike. And I say tricked because I talked to enough St. Paul teachers. I talked to enough of them to understand that by and large, these teachers don't know what they don't know. I'll just say that. Nick Faber told them all of the woke sounding buzzwords and one-liners, led them to believe it was about making sure the EAs and the TAs and support staff, in addition to children of color, were taken care of. But a little side note on the EAs and the TAs, Nick Faber actually turned down an offer from St. Paul Public Schools that would have made sure the support staff, the TAs, the EAs, had a living wage. He said no. So not only was it not about our children, it also wasn't about their staff. And that connects to something I'll talk about in a little bit. But the strike was really about what teachers union strikes are always about, what they're usually about. Making sure the most senior, mostly white, let me say that again, the most senior, mostly white teachers get salary increases while at the same time have less accountability for educating our children. So they turned their backs on our children, and then COVID came knocking. And right before COVID kicked the door down, they called off the strike. Let me do these air quotes. They returned to work for financial reasons. You on strike, school was going to shut down. They didn't want to lose their standing. They didn't want to lose their health insurance. And I don't blame them for that, right? We all need health insurance. But if you're striking for the benefit, for the sake of our children, for the sake of EAs and TAs and the support staff. Well, why are our children and those EAs and TAs that I mentioned still at the bottom, right? If you think about children of color in our schools not getting what we need, right? Our babies aren't getting what they need. But then when you think about who are the EAs and the TAs and the support staff, right? Those folks that really, in my opinion, hold our schools together. They make the school day run smoothly for our children. Who are those folks? What they look like? Well, they're not the most senior. They're not mostly white. They're mostly women, mostly people of color. And again, left out, just like our children. So when I say the teachers union strike that was happening before COVID could be a reason why our high schoolers in St. Paul are failing 40% of their classes, you got to think about it, right? Think about it a little bit. This is Dark Side of Education, y'all. We're live on Citizen Ed and Justice for the Cities. Like I said, it might get ugly. We don't take it easy on the status quo on this show. Not at all. So they went on strike, COVID hit, they returned to work. But when you think about all of our high schoolers in St. Paul failing 40% of their classes, did the teachers ever really return to work? It's a question. I mean, is it possible that Nick Faber has been telling teachers to mail it in? Telling them not to provide the students quality in-person or online education? I look at it like this. The article that I read earlier this week said that the students are failing. And I want to say that the high schoolers are in St. Paul are being left behind in 40% of their classes, receiving an F in 40% of their classes. How could that be? How could it be? And I could go many different directions with this, y'all. So keep up, but I'm going to try to stay focused. Now, how could it be that our children are receiving F grades and teachers' unions are calling for zero accountability for teachers? And one of the ways they're doing that is to say, hey, let's cancel all of the tests that show us just how well our schools are doing. Now, some folks will say, well, those tests are, tell us how well the children are doing. Well, let's flip that around, because I think they tell us how well our schools are doing. Remember, all children are capable. All children are capable of learning. It's the school's responsibility to educate, to provide that quality instruction. So when you think about our children receiving Fs, but then you think about, well, who do we hold responsible for that? Where's the accountability? Well, teachers' unions are running from that. They're scared for the world to see exactly what's been going on. Now, we can all make assumptions about how things are going. But why should we have to assume, right? Why should we have to guess? We parents, we don't deserve to just guess. We deserve to know. Right? In the article, it also mentioned that about 900 students will need credit recovery this year. Double the number of children from last year. Are they ever going to be able to make those credits up? What's their future look like? Especially coming from a district where, and a state where we tout, right? We parade a 0.5% increase in our graduation rate, while at the same time, our education leaders know that, yes, our children might be graduating. But when they get to that next level, they're in remedial courses. That means they get to college after receiving that high school diploma, they get to college only to have to take, in some cases, 8th grade math, 10th grade math. So a lot of folks will get caught up in this moment. And I just say, we need to be looking to the future, right? We need to be thinking about how many of our children are being left behind. 900 students, St. Paul Public Schools will need credit recovery this year. And schools have done very little. Let me back up a little bit. The teachers' unions have allowed schools or forced schools to do very little when it comes to providing quality education. And again, this is just high schoolers, y'all. What about our elementary and middle school age children? I wonder how it's going for them. What you think? Now, we have a middle schooler, and we just had our conferences for our daughter on this past Thursday. She's been working hard, staying focused, experiencing what quality education is like at her school. But that's why we fight this fight, right? It ain't about just our own, right? That we raise. We fight this fight because all of our children should have the right to and experience a quality education, right? We need to know how effective our schools are. Now this is, again, high schoolers. It's not looking good. When you think about the experience you might be having with your elementary student, I've got plenty of nephews and nieces who attend St. Paul Public Schools. What's that experience? What's that experience like? What has it been like? Again, we need to know how effective our children's schools are. And the only tool we currently have is the test, the MCAs. And I'll tell you that there's a narrative that the teachers' unions try to get going out here. The narrative that the test is racist. The test is biased. Only white rich kids can do well on the test. But when you think about that narrative, whether you agree or not, and I disagree, think there could maybe be some vocabulary changes. But I disagree with the notion that because our children are children of color, they can't do well on that test. And just a side note, have you ever seen, I've never seen any efforts from the teachers' unions or any of the other anti-testers to make the test less racist, to make the test less biased. And yeah, you might ask, well, how do you know the teachers' union is pumping that narrative? Well, here in Minnesota, we have students who are told by their teachers, opt out of the test. That test is racist. But if you go ask some of those same teachers, well, what's racist about the test? They can give you some talking points, but nothing of substance. You push them past this talking points and you realize it's just another attempt by the teachers' union to first, here's what they do, right? They sweep our children into that pipeline to prison. Then they pump this narrative around testing so they can sweep what's happening in our classrooms and in our schools under the rug. Then they stand beside us at the protest against police brutality and the police unions, and they act like they don't know how our children got there. Cogitate. That's how it goes down here in Minnesota. You think about racism, discrimination. This is what our children are facing. And in a second here, I'm going to get to the adults in the building. Well, you think about racism and discrimination. It's something that every year there's a new conversation starting. Someone just started the conversation. I'll tell you, here in Minnesota, it's been past time to move to action. All right, it's been past time to let the status quo know we ain't taking it no more. Right? And just check this out. While all this teaching ain't been happening in St. Paul Public Schools, they have our children out there playing sports, catching COVID. No math teams, no debate, football. There's another one of the stories that was released or published this week. High school teams not being able to play in their playoffs because of COVID outbreaks on the team. So you're telling me our children have more of an opportunity. And I think this goes into something deep when you think about children of color. And you might have to be a person of color to really connect with this, but think about this. When I grew up, when I was a youngster, one of the narratives we'd always get was that we could go to the NFL or the NBA. Or in my case, it was, MLB, play some baseball. That was the narrative that was socialized into us. So when I think about the fact that our children are allowed to go out there and play sports, but they're not able to participate on the math team, right? They're able to go out there and play sports, but they're not able to get an in-person learning experience, not able to get a quality online learning experience. What's that say? What's that say about the priorities? How long are we going to let the teachers' unions, the status quo education leaders tell us what our priorities are? All right? We have to take control. I was hearing a lot of conversation about, well, now the election's over, what do we do? Well, if you weren't doing nothing before the election, there's always opportunity to step up. But if you were doing something, if you were fighting the fight, it's time to step that fight up. Because if you see, if you've been even paying attention at the national level, and I was checking out 8 Black Hands podcast last week or this past Friday, where they were talking about the Secretary of Education. Some picks, some possible picks, some potential candidates for that role. Well, if you go look that up, who did the teachers' unions just come out and attack? The black woman, right? The woman of color. And that's a national thing. If you think locally, we've had opportunities for our children to have great women of color as the superintendent, people of color who had experiences that might be similar to our children, similar to those of ourselves. But what did the teachers' unions do here? Well, the same thing they do nationally is the same thing they do locally. They make sure that in all of their policies, in all of their goals, in all of their objectives, their strategies, their purpose is to make sure our children of color, even low-income white kids, don't receive a quality education. They do everything they can to make sure our children of color, low-income white kids, all kids don't have people who look like me in the classroom, at the front of the classroom, teaching. That's what they do. Well, who locally? Well, thinking of St. Paul Public Schools, a few years ago, Superintendent Silva, Valeria. If you're tuning in, you know I got nothing but love for you. But Valeria Silva was trying to change things around, trying to listen to families, understood the power of parents, understood the power of authentic family engagement and partnering. And what happened to her? They ran her right out of business. Ran her right out of there. She's over in Puerto Rico teaching the children over there, doing what she loves to do. But they ran her out of there because while these unions pretend to be woke, they pretend to be progressive, pretend to be about Black, brown, and indigenous children and people, they're not. That's an example from St. Paul Public Schools. If we go across the river to Minneapolis Public Schools, some of you may remember, and if not, you can Google both of these women. But Miss Bernadette Johnson, former superintendent of Minneapolis Public Schools, was all about quality, was all about making sure Black, brown, indigenous, making sure all of our children received a quality education. But what happened? Teachers unions got rid of her. Right? So every time you look, if you do the research, you get the information, you see that if it's not us, if it's not the parents, it's not our students leading the charge, they can just get rid of the leaders that they hire. But at some point, we've got to understand they can't get rid of us. Right? So there's a huge opportunity. And this is why we parents and our children have to continue to get the information, right? Get the tools, the resources that we need, get organized to make sure that the teachers unions don't continue to lead our education system any further down the drain. Right? This education system that they're leading down the drain, that system has our children's brains, the present, the future in its hands. And currently under the feet of the white power loving teachers unions, the white power hoarders. I could go on all day about them. White power wielding. Okay. Let's move on. Let me get some more coffee. You got your coffee? I'm feeling good this morning. I hope you're feeling good, y'all. It's Dark Side of Education. Again, we live on Citizen Ed, Justice for the Cities. Get your coffee. Drink your water. Water is life. You see my shirt? Celebrate indigenous. Which way I gotta go? Yeah. I like this shirt. Let me get to some of these comments. I see y'all's chopping it up. Y'all's chopping it up in the comments. What we got over here? It's a question from Chaz. Do you know the numbers for underachieving since the distance learning this school year? We don't currently, right? We're getting some anecdotal reports from districts. Our family advocates are hearing different things. We're having different conversations. One of the things I'll say is this, Chaz, and thanks for the question. What we are seeing, and we won't have these numbers officially for another couple of months, I believe. But what we are seeing is large school districts where a lot of families are chucking up the deuces and figuring out a better learning environment for the children. So we are seeing enrollment numbers drop, right? We're seeing our children find better opportunities. So no data yet, but I'll say this, Chaz, here in the next few weeks, next month or so, you'll start to hear that push from the teachers unions, from Education Minnesota, from the local chapters, to make sure we never get that data. They're going to do everything they can, contact every person that they've bought and paid for to try to eliminate testing, to try to make sure we don't know what's going on. So we got to keep our eyes open for that. And I'll for sure be keeping my eyes and ears open for any type of data that we can get. I want to say that in St. Paul Public Schools, and forgive me if I get this number wrong, but I believe about 1,700 families have left the district during this time, this year. So we'll see. All right, I would say they're leaving because things aren't good. Right? If schools aren't quality, get the heck out of there. And that's what they're doing, and we love to see it. What else we got here? Water is life. Jenny Smith. That's right. That's right. Let's see what we got. Dang, the Grand Wizard. Well, I said, he's grand and a wizard, but you got the wordplay, Christina. Very smart. I mean, I think we gotta call them what they are, right? One of the things that I think always happens, and we experience this as Black people, as people of color, is we're the ones who are supposed to turn the other cheek, right? We're the ones who are supposed to just take it from these people and not have nothing to say. Well, it doesn't matter if it's Nick Faber, if it's Denise Specht, if it's Randy Weingarten at the national level. The student drawing earlier this week, it was a pretty cool student drawing, but reminded me of Randy Weingarten. But it doesn't matter who any of these folks are. If they're leading the union, their job, their responsibility does not align with quality education for our children. So I call them what they are, Jasmine Burks, appreciate you. 40% is a lot. You damn right. You damn right. 40% and 900 students that are going to need credit recovery. What's we got here? My Republican colleague, shout out to the Black Republicans. We holding it down. Ray Ankrum, one of the hosts on Eight Black Hands. Somebody asked me, why do they call it 8 Black Hands? And I said, well, damn, what do you want them to call it? 8 Black Lips? 8 Black Hands. So shout out to 8 Black Hands podcast. But Ray says, low-income white kids, the forgotten stakeholder. And I agree with you, Ray. Right? I think that folks in education have done a hell of a job with making us all believe that it's just a black-white issue, right? Us versus them. And I don't mind the us versus them, but, that's when I'm talking about the teachers' unions versus us, right? But they've definitely done a great job at making us forget about low-income white kids who, are a part of those worst in nation education gaps, right? They also do a great job at making us forget about, Hmong students, Native American students, because they have us caught up in this Black students and white students, and they want us to forget about the rest of the students, right? That's that culture war, I think. There we go. There you go, Toya. 4 Black men with 8 Black hands. That's right. That's right. All right. Y'all keep the comments flowing. I'm going to try to keep flowing. I want to get back to what I was thinking about. So we got that part, right? And one of the things I wanted to talk about, in addition to that racism and discrimination that we experience in our public education system. And let me call this out. I say our public education system, right? Because that's whose it is. It's ours. We have to take ownership for that system. We've given these folks enough time to put all of their brains together. And we're seeing that all of their brains together it isn't producing much. And it's unfortunate for our children. So that racism, discrimination is there. I want to talk about the forced labor, right? Now usually when I'm talking about the teachers' unions, as you just heard, I'm talking about usually how they're doing our children, right? But I'm going to change gears a little bit. Of course, still keeping the spotlight on teachers' unions. But now I'm going to talk about how the racism and discrimination that guides their treatment and advocacy, or let's say lack thereof, for EAs, TAs, ESPs, and all of the other support staff that are currently working on the front lines with our children in what we call essential kids care locations, essential kids care sites. And most of the time, you know, my experience with the teachers unions are usually around the metro area, St. Paul, Minneapolis, right? But how our EAs and TAs and ESPs and the folks who are on the front lines at those sites are being treated, to me, it is sort of it's bad, right? I'm trying to think of the word, but they're being treated bad, right? They're being forced into working in potentially hazardous conditions. And this is happening across the state. It's happening all across the state. But they're being forced to work in these potentially hazardous conditions in order for those designated as essential workers to be able to go to work and not have to leave their young children at home by themselves. Now, I want to ask a question. Do you think these EAs and TAs and support staff have the same salary and benefits as the most senior, mostly white teachers that the teachers unions prioritize in their union negotiations and when they go on strike? What you think? Oh, dumb question. I know. Nah, there are no dumb questions, right? The answer is no, of course not. Of course they're not treated the same as those most senior, mostly white teachers who the teachers unions cape for. The people who are working the essential kids care sites for the most part are not mostly white. If they were, they wouldn't be working for less than a living wage, right? They wouldn't be left out of the conversations that union leaders have with school board directors. But the EAs and TAs and ESPs and other support staff, you know, like I said earlier, the folks who really make the days go smoothly for our children, what do those folks look like? What do they look like? If you think back to your own experience in K-12, what do those folks look like? And when I say these are the folks that are making the days go smoothly for our children, I could name off a bunch of people, a bunch of EAs and TAs and support staff who were there for me when I was a child, when I was in school, whether I was having a tough day or not. People like Miss Lynn Wright, Ronnie Smith, Gerald Alexander, Mr. Cornelius, right? Folks that made sure the kids who looked like them or not, the day was going smooth. So if you haven't caught on, these EAs and TAs and ESPs and support staff, they're mostly people of color, Black, brown, indigenous people. And I know some of you might be thinking, I had a conversation earlier where someone asked me, well, why do these people, if they're not really getting the representation that they deserve from the union, how is it so easy for them to be out there protesting and going on strike and supporting what the teachers' unions are doing? And I said, well, it's easy because the unions don't give them all the information. It's easy because no one is putting a fire to the feet of the teachers' unions to make sure that they stop doing our children how they're doing them, to make sure that they stop doing our support staff how they're doing them. So that's how they get misled in the teachers' union strikes. And they also, COVID or not, right? They also get forced into working in the most challenging environments. And right now, yeah, we're talking about essential kids care. But on a day-to-day, a year-to-year, these are the folks that are working. I hope they're woke. But these are the folks that are working in the most challenging environments without any genuine support of the leaders of the teachers' union. Most senior, mostly white teachers' unions. Now, for those who are used to facing racist systems, it's easy for us to see the racism. It's easy for us to see the discrimination and feel discriminated against. I wish it was easy for us to see it and feel it when it's coming from teachers' unions. With all this COVID stuff, I hear a lot of people saying they can't wait until things go back to normal. But why should things go back to normal, y'all? What's normal for EAs and TAs and ESPs? What's normal for our children of color and low-income white children? Now, see, what's normal, y'all? Now, here's the thing. Here's where we have an opportunity, y'all. Because normal, how things used to be, didn't work. It ain't working for our children of color or our support staff of color. Normal's not working for children. Normal's not working for the adults in the building. Why would we want to go back to normal? You know what normal is in my mind? Normal is children can't read. That's normal for our children. That's what going back to normal, how things used to be, which kind of, if you think about it, and maybe it just dawned on me, but hell, we haven't left normal. Things are now, during COVID, how they've always been, right? So it's making me think, what are people even talking about? What's that normal for them? If normal in Minnesota means we have a bunch of schools where 4 out of 5 kids can't read. If normal in Minnesota means we have EAs and TAs and ESPs and support staff who can't pay their rent without working 3 jobs. And that normal, I'll say, has been and is currently still mostly influenced by the same racist institutions. Those who are grand and wizards at keeping our children from quality education. Yep, you got it. It don't take much thinking if you're watching. You got it. It's the teachers' unions. So why we want to go back to normal? I just got an email the other day that reminded me, sort of let me know that in the midst of all of this noise about going back to normal, if you dive a little bit deeper into who's spewing that normal, right? Who you think wants things to go back to normal or stay normal, as I'll now say? Who do you think wants things to stay the same? Because there was this email that I got a few days ago. Person emailed me, they said, hey, you're going to want to read this. And there was a survey that was done. I'm going to try to dive into this, I got to read it a little bit more. But one of the things they highlighted for me was that of the families who participated in this survey, mostly families of color, low-income white families, folks who are impacted by our worst in nation education gaps, those families said, we don't want to go back to normal. We don't want things to go back to how they used to be. And when I read that, it felt so good, right? Because I would say now is the time, y'all. As my big sister Nakima says, the time is now. To pave that new path for what our public education system looks like. And while we're paving that path, while we're on that journey, we can't expect for parents, students, or staff to want to stay in a system that is controlled by a racist institution such as the teachers union. Families are leaving. Like I said earlier, and if I have this number wrong, so what? It's something close. But about 1,700 families, 1,700 children have unenrolled from St. Paul Public Schools. I can't wait to catch wind of how many children have unenrolled from Minneapolis Public Schools. I'm expecting some big changes. And because I'm expecting those big changes, I'm also expecting that we as parents, we as freedom fighters in this community, across this state, I'm expecting that we are ready, right? We're ready to forge that new path, right? To go down that path of parent-led schools, to go down that path that says, hey, we are here to reclaim our public education system. Right? When you think about this, and some folks, they're outside fighters, inside fighters, they take, but we have to take that inside outside approach. It's a both and situation. Right? It's a both and situation for our public education system that's currently controlled by the teachers union. Right? And why do I say it's controlled by the teachers unions? Well, you got to follow the money. You got to follow the money. 27 million right here in Minnesota that was contributed to candidates, mostly DFL candidates, right? That's how important it is to the teachers union to control this education system, to control our public education system. So I say it's a both and, right? We have to think new things. We have to come up with new solutions, new ways to make sure our children are receiving quality education. And we also have to leave low-performing schools and school systems. That's the both and I'm talking about. I'm not waiting as a parent for some school to get better. My daughter doesn't have that time to waste. Our children don't have time to waste. They don't have time for us to sit back and wait for this system to do something it's never done before. Not this system. It's never happened. You look 20 years ago in Minnesota, it was bad. People might not have been talking about it as much as we are now, but it was bad. So when I say it's time because, I think these racist institutions are on the ropes. And if you were to ask a boxer what goes across their mind, what goes through their mind when their opponent is on the ropes, they might say something along the lines of reclaim and transform. What? I know. Well, that's what I would say, right? And here's what I mean. It's time to reclaim our public education system. It's time to transform our schools into the quality learning environments that we, for far too long, have assumed our children have been in. We've assumed that. You think about the families that, are immigrant and refugee communities that come to Minnesota. And as a part of their culture, they may look at the system as the authority. I think we all slip into that sometimes, whether it's a cultural thing or not. But what's happening is more and more folks are waking up, right? We can't continue to assume that the schools are going to provide our children with the quality education that they need. We can't continue to assume that people of color who are mostly support staff in our schools in Minnesota, we can't continue to assume that these teachers' unions and federations of educators are going to take care of those people. So there's an opportunity. The opportunity that is there is for us all to stand up and not stand back, not stand by, but for us to stand up and come together as folks who this system is continuing to do everything it can. The institution that is the teachers' unions, those who are grand and wizards at keeping our children from quality education, are also grand and wizards at making sure the folks who are in our children's buildings are also at the bottom, don't have the livable wage, don't have the hazardous pay that they need. So when we think about how we reclaim our public education system, I don't have all the answers right here, but together, I think we can come up with some damn good solutions. I think we can come up with solutions that put parent voice at the table. And people get it, they kind of get it confused sometimes, right? I mean, we've got Minnesota Parent Union now, but just think of all of the people that are parents. And we have open arms for all parents, all folks who want to see and help bring an end to our worst in nation education gaps. But think about what the future looks like when all of us come together, when all of us open our eyes to the things that are solvable if we choose to do so. What does that future look like? Right now, parents are saying we have an idea of what the future could look like. right? They're leaving low-performing schools, persistently low-performing schools. They're leaving school districts that have ignored them, that have not provided what they are expecting. They're leaving those places that have low expectations for our children and also have low expectations for our support staff. These unions, they can talk the talk. It's time for us to walk that walk. Uniform, inadequate systems of schools have been and continue to have a negative impact on all of us. They did before COVID. So like I said, we better stand up and not stand by and watch the most racist institution attempt to make us go extinct. That's essentially what they're doing with their millions of dollars in political campaign contributions. Quality is a must. Failure is not an option, y'all. Thank you for joining me today on Citizen Ed and Justice for the Cities. This is Dark Side of Education with me, Rashad Turner, and you. And together, we will crush the status quo. I'll see y'all next week, God willing. God's peace and blessings, everyone. Have a great day.